Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up in the next hour, the midterm elections are over, but the security risks remain. We talk about the cyber threats that still hang over coming elections worldwide and why, despite the meddling outcry, Facebook and Google are the big winners of the night. Plus, the most influential tech investor from Russia isn't overly concerned about Facebook and election meddling. We will hear from DST Global founder Yuri Milner. Amazon's potential HQ2 and HQ3. What's behind the tech giant's decision to open two new potential headquarters in Virginia and New York? But first, to our top story. On Monday, Facebook received a tip from U.S. authorities about accounts that may have been tied to Russia's Internet Research Agency. That is the same agency accused in a federal indictment in February of trying to interfere in the 2016 election. Facebook said it removed those accounts as well as content from the social network that falsely claimed Democrats and Republicans were supposed to vote on different days. Now that the midterm elections are over, what is the next big threat? We spoke with Deputy Director of the Brennan Center's Democracy Program, Lawrence Norden, on Wednesday, along with Bloomberg Tech's Sarah Fryer.
There are two things that we should be talking about, I suppose. One is, and because we saw this in 2016, there are at least two avenues where we've seen interference in our elections. One is with the election infrastructure. And I would say when it comes to the mechanics of the elections, things for most people looked pretty good yesterday. There's some notable glitches, but by and large, it looked like a normal election. And I didn't see anything yesterday in terms of that infrastructure, the voting machines, the reporting on election night, that it looked like there was any kind of interference.
Well, there were reports of voting machines, electronic voting machines, breaking down across the country. And as a result, long lines. We can expect some people probably just went home or went to their jobs because they couldn't stand in those long lines. You know, what's the extent of that and why did it happen?
Yeah. Sadly, I think that happened more than it should happen. And where we did see it, in most cases, I think we can tie it to how old our equipment is. We've got in the states that really saw problems, Georgia is an example, South Carolina, Philadelphia, we heard of examples of machines sometimes flipping votes. We heard that on early voting. We heard on election day where it wasn't registering the vote that the voter intended, and machines breaking down and those kinds of things lead to long lines. And I think that really comes down to a lack of investment in all of those cases in Texas as well. You've got some really old machines and they just need to be replaced. I will say I haven't seen any evidence that was the result of foul play, but the flip side of reliability is security, and if we continue to use those systems, we do leave ourselves vulnerable in 2020, particularly if these machines that don't have paper backups. As Undersecretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Chris Krebs, said, 2020 is the big game, and I think we need to be prepared for that.
So let's talk about potential foul play. Sarah, we got notified by Facebook that they had taken down these accounts in the middle of Election Day. What exactly happened?
So on Sunday night, Facebook gets a warning from federal authorities that it may have some accounts on Facebook and Instagram that were linked to the IRA, which, as you said, was related to the 2016 election interference. And Facebook has been trying to invest in finding these things. Their latest tip comes from the federal government. They take them down, and then the IRA puts out a post, or someone claiming to be them at least, puts out a post listing the accounts, sort of taking credit for what they've done. And Facebook removed a few more. And then a little bit after polls close, they come out and say, linking these accounts more directly to the IRA. They're still not definitively saying if this is coming from Russia. We have found other election interference type campaigns using fake accounts on Facebook in the last few months that are from Iran, that are from domestic actors. So far they think this is Russia, but we're not sure yet.
And Lawrence, both Sarah and I have been inside Facebook's election war room, where they've got a team of people, working across all of these potential threats. And the familiar refrain from in there is that actually the biggest threats, the most activity they saw was from within the United States, not from outside the United States. Despite this revelation of accounts potentially connected to the IRA, how dangerous is that? How much of a threat is that? Well,
first of all, I should say that there's additional information about the IRA. There was the U.S. attorney fingered a conspiracy at the beginning of just about a month ago, saying that there was a conspiracy to with about a $10 million a year budget to post on social media to buy ads that were meant to interfere in our election. So that's ongoing. And I would say the concern there is what it might signal for the future. And that is, while it wasn't nearly what it was in 2018 compared to what we saw in 2016, my concern would be that they're going to come back in a big way ahead of 2020 when the stakes are much bigger. And again, this other area of election infrastructure, while we didn't see a lot of activity in this election, that we have to be worried, again, that they're going to come back in a bigger way in 2020. And I think we have to take the necessary steps to protect from that.
Sarah, you have a new piece out today that talks about how even before the election happened, Facebook and Google were the ad winners. How big?
So political ad spending is up across the board, and I think that ties a little bit to what we've seen in terms of voter turnout and just the excitement and energy around from both sides trying to figure out how this election is going to affect us, given sort of the divisive political climate right now. So political spending is up. It has nothing to do with there's been no sort of fallback in spending related to some of the problems we've seen. One thing I would point out, though, is the transparency efforts from the companies to try to make that spending a little more accountable to their users, to make it clear who's paying for what ads. There have been reports coming out in the last few weeks saying that is very easy to falsify on Facebook, that they need to secure that system. There were reporters who went out and bought ads in the name of Mitch McConnell, in the name of ISIS, in the name of Mike Pence. It is very easy to say the ad is paid for by someone who it's not paid for by.
Well, cryptocurrency startup Bitfury had a high-profile investor in its latest funding round. Bitfury raised $80 million, including an unknown investment from billionaire Mike Novogratz's merchant bank. Bloomberg's learned the deal that values the company at more than $1 billion. Bitfury sells gear used to mine cryptocurrencies and develops blockchain technology. Still ahead, my extended sit-down with DST Global founder Yuri Milner, why he's not concerned about Facebook's existential crisis and even refutes that they're having one. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. The most influential tech investor from Russia isn't overly concerned about Facebook and global election meddling. DST Global founder Yuri Milner was an early investor in Facebook and Twitter, and after selling those stakes went on to invest in Spotify and Airbnb, Alibaba, Xiaomi, and Flipkart. We spoke with him at length from the Breakthrough Prize Award ceremony in Mountain View, California this past Sunday, the so-called Oscars of Science, sponsored by Milner, along with Mark Zuckerberg and Google co-founder Sergey Brin, to reward achievements in math, physics, and other sciences. I asked him if, after 7 years, whether he felt the investment and exposure that this ceremony provides, science has really helped move science forward.
What we believe this prize can catalyze is the public acceptance of science as an amazing achievement. We want to create a platform for scientists to become celebrities. Similar to athletes and performers and entertainers. We all recognize, and you only need to look at social media to realize that scientists are not being celebrated. You know, they are doing amazing things, but nobody knows about them. So that's really number one goal for this prize. The second goal is inspire young generation to choose science as their career, and I think we are making progress there as well.
So, of the prizes being awarded tonight, what are the discoveries that you're most excited about?
Well, I would say maybe, I mean, they're all exciting, but the one that really I feel is very special is the physics prize, which is being awarded to Jocelyn Bell Burnell, and she's a incredible scientist from UK. He made a seminal discovery of pulsars. Those are special types of stars, fast rotating, and she was not quite recognized at the time of the discovery, and now this recognition is catching up with her.
I'm curious about your thoughts on the private space race happening now between whether it's Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson. You know, I know you've always been fascinated by space. How do you see that private space race playing out?
Okay, well, we have a couple of initiatives there too. You know, one is called Starshot. This is as opposed to the ones mentioned by Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Branson. This one is really focusing on interstellar travel. You know, they are focusing on our solar system. You know, chemical fuel is really the way to move around the solar system, but that's not going to work in interstellar travel. So the initiative that we are funding called Starshot, it is really trying to determine whether we have a feasible technology to move between stars. And the distances there are much, much bigger. And that's what we're working on.
What's been the progress?
Well, this is a 2-year-old initiative. We have committed $100 million to fund R&D phase. This will probably take another 5-7 years. And by that time, we'll be able to tell you whether this is a feasible and realistic to achieve this objective in the next 25-30 years.
So you're not competing with Elon Musk
No.
and Jeff Bezos necessarily?
No. Well, you know, the universe is much bigger than just our solar system.
If you could put your bet on one of them, who would it be?
Well, I mean, they are all targeting different, you know, they all have their different objectives. You know, Elon is mostly focused on Mars. Jeff Bezos is focused on near-Earth, you know, orbits and moving industries there and things like that. Branson, I think, is interested in tourism. I think they're all slightly different, and the space is so big, so we need more of those.
You started this prize with Mark Zuckerberg, and you were an early backer of Facebook. Facebook's in a sort of existential crisis right now. Mark has said the next big pivot is going to be towards video, towards messaging. How optimistic are you about further growth in Facebook and social networks in general, given saturation, given privacy concerns, given this existential crisis?
Well, first of all, I don't agree that it's an existential crisis. I think it's a little bump on the road. I think that Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram are amazing products with more than 1 billion people each. So you can't really dismiss it as an existential crisis. But I think that Facebook always was and is an evolving system. And they've always been responding to challenges. And the challenges that they are facing can be solved through a combination of human attention and artificial intelligence elements. So, you know, there are always bad actors who are testing different products. But I feel confident that this will be taken care of through technology. You know, it's a technology company.
Run by humans.
Run by humans.
Who have to make the right decisions, right?
Yes.
So does it concern you that, you know, the privacy, the hacking, the potential election meddling, the fact that the founders of all the companies that you mentioned that Facebook bought have gone? One of them even tried to start a delete Facebook movement.
Well, everything should be put in perspective. If you look at other companies that did acquisitions, the founders of these companies stayed for an amazingly long time. I mean, it should be compared to other acquisitions. You know, it's very often happens that founders are gone in 12 months or in 6 months. You know, here I think they've stayed long enough to ensure continuity and transition, and I think those products will do very well going forward.
Do you think that Facebook and Twitter, which is another company you backed, are living up to the expectations of people living in democracies, users living in democracies?
Well, democracy is an open system. It has this amazing, incredible achievement, which is called free speech. And there will always be bad actors who are abusing this gift that has been given to them.
I know you've tried to keep your head above politics, but the geopolitical tensions, has that made your job more difficult as a bridge between Russia and Silicon Valley?
Well, I've never been a bridge between Russia and Silicon Valley, and never wanted to be.
But in a way you have.
I mean, I don't know about that.
Created relationships and connections.
You know, I've built a company in Russia, which is called Mail. I think this company is doing exactly what other social media has done around the world, meaning this company gave voice to dozens of millions of people. And then I started investing globally in places like China, India, US. We've been very fortunate to call some good investments. So I think that it's not really about building bridges, but I think it's about pursuing global agenda. That's the way I see my mission. And by the way, science is another platform which is intrinsically global. Our investments are completely business driven, and I think it's spread out around the world roughly proportionate to the significance of technology which is being built around the world.
Yeah. So if someone were to say to you, did the Russians meddle in the election? Do you believe they did? How do you answer that?
I'm reading the same magazines and the newspapers as you're reading, so I have no special expertise here.
My interview there with DST Global founder Yuri Milner. We will have more from the Breakthrough Prize later this hour. Our interview with 23andMe CEO Anne Wojcicki ahead. And up next, the Bloomberg New Economy Forum from Singapore. Our exclusive interview with MasterCard CEO Ajay Banga. What he has to say about the credit card giant's strategy for competing in China. Next. This is Bloomberg. Disney will sell some TV channels in Europe to win EU approval for its purchase of entertainment assets from 21st Century Fox. The EU says Disney pledged to sell the History Channel and other factual channels operated by its A&E television network's joint venture with Hearst. Regulatory approvals are the last hurdles for the Disney-Fox deal. Well, the Bloomberg New Economy Forum kicked off this week in Singapore. The event brought together global leaders engaging with the world's most significant changes and challenges. Bloomberg's Eric Schatzker spoke with MasterCard CEO earlier, specifically about the company's strategy for competing in China and with the likes of Alipay and WeChat. Take a listen.
We don't actually connect with the consumer directly. So even if an Alipay or a WeChat were doing this, I would be, if I were able to operate in China domestically, I'd be a partner of theirs. Right now, the real problem is we're not even allowed to operate domestically in China. So this is a non-level playing field.
Except it's not outside China in the sense that Alipay and WeChat are expanding. I just saw them, for example, in Tokyo. There's Alipay all over the place, expanding into countries outside.
Yeah, but that's
China.
For the Chinese who's traveling there. So what they don't have is for anybody locally, because mostly people overseas in those countries and markets, banks have a pretty good digital offering. and they're able to offer their own versions of it. PayPal is out there. You've got different kinds of players playing in the system.
Do you not see those companies as a threat to your business?
Oh, I see them as a threat definitely in China, and I see them. Look, I see everybody as a threat. If you don't see companies as a threat, you don't survive for tomorrow.
Healthy sense of paranoia.
Exactly. It's always good in a boss. But the fact is that what I really see is an opportunity to work with them as constructive partners. Look, what we bring is connectivity. We can operate with billions of people, millions of merchants, with banks all over the world, with 200 countries, local legal regulations built in our system. We can do dispute settlement, cybersecurity, all that stuff. So quite honestly, almost all these players come back to us for partnerships. Look at PayPal in the US. Look at the mobile network operators across the world in Africa. Some time ago, everybody thought they would disintermediate the payment networks. And they came to the conclusion that actually we bring stuff to them they don't get. So we partner with Apple, we partner with Google. So it's the way I think our job is the creation of an ecosystem and infrastructure in partnership with people who know how to reach a consumer.
Ajay, you talked on your most recent conference call about the need for vigilance for the potential impacts of macroeconomic policy shifts.
Yes.
And I wonder why, given that MasterCard's trajectory has been so seemingly immune to economic weakness in the 9 years that you've been running the company, for example.
Right. Well,
what do you worry about?
We've had everything. We've had a good 8-9 year run. Part of it is
good.
Part of it is if you think about the economy in these 8 or 9 years, it's actually come out of the crisis, and globally, in fact, in the last 2-3 years, it almost felt like synchronized global growth. What I was referring to is that I think macroeconomic indicators like a change in liquidity, a change in fiscal policy, the tariff system, these could change the way that people travel, that small businesses trade. And if that begins to happen, the downstream effect of that impacts me.
Do you sense that that's happening already?
Not yet. I actually see consumer spending growing very healthily. The US is actually really doing well on the consumer. Their confidence is high, they're spending. I see that in parts of Europe, I see that in ASEAN. So I don't really see that yet. But the issue was more about, am I concerned about it? Yes, I am. The fact is, we grow also from the secular shift of cash to electronic. That sees us through economic cycles, meaning if people spend less, but they spend more of it electronically, I buffer my way through that.
We haven't had, Ajay, well, I wouldn't say we haven't had. We've had a bond bull market for 30 years. We've certainly had periods of rising interest rates within the bond bull market, but we haven't had a secular bond bear market and rising long-term interest rates for 3 decades.
That's correct.
What do you think is going to happen if, in fact, we are entering a bond bear market? How is that going to affect the economy, but the second-order effect, which is spending patterns by your customers?
So I actually think that what will happen if you get into this kind of a situation of long-term interest rates, you'll get a yield curve that actually looks more healthy. If anything, banks will actually get more profitability out of that yield curve. And banks are the first end of this arrow quiver, which goes at getting people to convert from cash to electronic. Banks need to take on the risk of managing that consumer, of managing the merchant. So in a funny kind of way, I actually think that a more profitable banking system actually helps create tailwind in the electronic payment rails, if you know what I mean. And the other side of that is the issue of consumer confidence. Will that get impacted by a yield curve that is positively inclined to the right? It depends. If it impacts their mortgage rates and it reduces their ability to buy a home or reduces their ability to bear debt,
that's not healthy.
That's a problem. But on the other hand, if it makes them feel they're in a long-term boom economy, because in a long-term boom economy, logically, long-term rates should be higher than short-term rates. Then you'd get a constructive consumer confidence boost.
That was the MasterCard CEO at the Bloomberg New Economy Forum in Singapore. Still ahead, this week, Amazon narrowed its search for a new headquarters to not 1 but 2 cities. But not everyone is excited about it. We'll talk about the impact on housing prices and traffic. Plus, what a newly Democratic U.S. House means for the future of tech policy. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Back to the midterms, this was one for the record books. While it wasn't a landslide for the Democratic Party, it is a victory and could mean changes in policy for big tech. House Democrats are likely to push for a robust data privacy law and could look to reinstate Obama-era net neutrality rules when they take control of the chamber next year. Wednesday, we spoke with Bloomberg's Ryan Vlastelica along with Bloomberg's Ben Brody from Washington.
I'm looking to privacy primarily. Net neutrality has obviously been a hot ticket item in the past, but privacy is where Republicans have signaled that they're willing to make a deal. Now, of course, they are still holding the Senate. They've actually extended their lead in the Senate, and Donald Trump is still a Republican last time I checked. Now, interestingly, this morning, he said that he might be willing to work with Democrats to regulate tech companies. That could mean something like antitrust scrutiny, but to me, I heard privacy. So that's really what I'm seeing. And the question that I'm watching is, how are the parties going to fight it out? And essentially that means how are the different chambers going to fight it out on how privacy enforcement is essentially done. So that's, I think, really what I'm watching. Then maybe we could turn to broadband infrastructure, net neutrality, antitrust, some of these other issues.
I want to take a closer look at what he had to say about social media companies. Long, heated press conference with the president earlier today. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Believe it or not, I'm one that really likes free speech. A lot of people don't understand that. But I am a big believer. When you start regulating, a lot of bad things can happen. But I would certainly talk to the Democrats if they want to do that. And I think they do want to do that.
Now, the president, some of his associates, like his 2020 campaign manager, have come down hard on Facebook and Twitter and Google for bias. The president has also singled out Amazon. Ryan, read between the lines there. What is the president saying about tech regulation?
Well, I think when it comes to tech, the area of social media is really the one that's going to be most in focus. It is a rare point of bipartisan agreement when it comes to the idea of regulating any kind of industry. And Republicans and Democrats are probably going to come at this from different issues. You have issues pertaining to harassment, election interference, and misinformation. You have data privacy, like we were talking about before. You'll probably be able to find some sort of consensus on these. Who knows what it's going to look like? Who knows how easy it'll be to institute it from a technical perspective? A lot of these companies, especially Facebook, have been already trying to grapple with some of these issues. How do they get some of the content off their platforms? How do they protect data? So on and so forth. So it remains to be seen when any of this will actually take effect, what the regulation is going to look like, what they're going to be required to do that they're not already trying to do right now. But as far as it goes, this is really one area where you have both Democrats and Republicans probably willing to work together.
Now, Ben, as you've reported, some of these tech companies are very active when it comes to lobbying. Millions and millions of dollars invested. What have Facebook and Google, what kind of money and causes have they been pushing for?
Right, absolutely. As you say, they're spending millions, and that's something that they've really ramped up in the last year. Just a few years ago, they were doing less than a quarter in some cases of what they're doing now. I think one of the things they're watching very, very closely is antitrust scrutiny. It's important to say here that we don't know of any antitrust case that's out there, but it's something that really scares them. Very often it's something that they want to hold off, throttle it in the cradle, if you will. It's not one of those things that they're willing to just kind of monitor from afar and let it develop. So I've seen a lot of development on antitrust scrutiny. I've seen a lot on net neutrality. I expect to see a lot on privacy. A lot of the trade groups that I work with have come out with privacy principles, been very active taking meetings on the Hill, and I think will be a big, big part of that discussion going forward, not least of all because they're looking at Europe and they're looking at California and they're seeing that the policy landscape is sort of already set here. And so the question is, can they make inroads here in Washington to get something that's a little more congenial?
Bloomberg's Ryan Vlastelica and Ben Brody. Well, Amazon's very public year-long search for a second headquarters could be coming to an end. Bloomberg has learned the world's largest online retailer is close to agreements that would set up not only an HQ2, but possibly an HQ3. One city will be the Crystal City area of Arlington in Northern Virginia, the other Long Island City in the New York borough of Queens. Amazon is scheduled to make an announcement by the end of the year. Tuesday, we dove through some of the larger implications for each chosen city with Jenny Schutz, a fellow at the Brookings Institution's Metropolitan Policy Program in Washington, D.C., along with Bloomberg Tech senior executive Brad Stone, who wrote the book on Amazon, The Everything Store.
probably Amazon was wary of recreating the same problems it had with Seattle, where they have 45,000 workers, the biggest employer in the city, overwhelming transit, sending home prices higher. And if you're going to hire 50,000 people in another city, you're probably bringing the same problems there. You know, the main thing they need to do is tap areas of technical talent, DC and New York being two of the biggest cities for engineers. And they probably decided, you know, they could go smaller in each city, get the tax benefits and tap those resources of talent, but avoid some of the problems.
Right. Governor Andrew Cuomo said he'd change his name to Amazon Cuomo if it would help them.
They should hold him to that.
To New York. Jenny, these are obviously two already well-established metropolitan areas. What does Amazon coming in and hiring 25,000 new workers in each place, how does that actually change the cities?
Well, these are two of the regions that probably can absorb a new Amazon headquarters better than most other candidates. As you said, they have a lot of talent there already. There's a good possibility that Amazon will hire a lot of local people as well as bringing some in from the Seattle headquarters. What we're concerned with is not just the regional impacts, but the local impacts. Where Amazon chooses to open its site will have big impacts on the housing markets locally.
So how will it impact the housing markets locally?
Well, both New York and Washington, D.C. are really tight housing markets, but within those regions, Long Island City and Crystal City are actually some of the more growth-friendly neighborhoods. Both of these are located a little bit outside of the central business district, so they've got slightly softer commercial real estate markets. Both of them are also pretty growth-friendly in their zoning. They allow tall buildings. So this is a really different animal than if Amazon, for instance, tried to go into Brownstone, Brooklyn, or a neighborhood like Georgetown in Washington, D.C. These are neighborhoods that are used to accommodating tall buildings. They don't have a lot of residential neighbors who are likely to push back, and so this is probably a relatively easy landing in both regions.
Brad, how do you imagine this will change the company, Amazon?
You know, not a lot. It's already a pretty decentralized and distributed company, lots of divisions that work independently. I don't know if there will be that much of a difference with teams working across the country from each other versus across Seattle. It's already a company where decision-making is very decentralized.
So, Jenny, talk to us about the longer-term implications here. Obviously, it's going to take some time for them to move in, for them to hire the workers, and for them to build up to that, you know, projected 25,000 in each place, if indeed these are the chosen cities. What are the longer-term implications that you're going to be watching?
Well, certainly we're going to be looking to see how the regions adapt to absorb more workers. In particular, are they going to build more housing? Is the demand for housing going to be right near the campus? So in Seattle, for instance, a lot of the workers are within walking and biking distance. These are both neighborhoods that can absorb some people within walking distance, but probably they'll need to build more. And both of the regions need to think about making their zoning more flexible. Both of them also have some pretty serious deferred maintenance on their transportation infrastructure. The New York City subway and Washington, D.C.'s metro system have had some ridership problems. They need to make long-term investments. The upside potential is that Amazon coming in could put pressure on local policymakers and force them to make investments that are better for existing residents and existing businesses.
Jenny Schutz there of the Brookings Institute and Bloomberg Tech's Brad Stone. Coming up, scooter sharing company Lime taps its first COO. We catch up with investor turned operator Joe Kraus next. Plus, Foxconn broke ground for the first time in the U.S. in September. Now it is in desperate need of a workforce. Why the company may be turning to China's labor force next. This is Bloomberg. In September, Wisconsin became the home to the first U.S. Foxconn factory. Now, less than 2 months later, the Taiwanese electronics maker is struggling to staff the facility. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the company is now considering bringing in personnel from China as it struggles to find engineers in the state's tight labor market. Foxconn has denied this. Unemployment in Wisconsin reached a record low this year, hitting 3.9% this month. That is the lowest in 49 years. Speaking of China, Alibaba co-founder Jack Ma didn't hold back on his opinion of the current trade spat. Speaking at the China International Import Expo in Shanghai, Jack Ma called the China-U.S. trade war, quote, the most stupid thing in this world. This week, Lime announced it would name GV general partner Joe Kraus to be its first chief operating officer. Kraus has been a member of Lime's board of directors and was pivotal to GV's investment in Lime's $335 million fundraising round earlier this year. While Kraus takes on this new role at Lime, he will continue to be a partner at GV. Kraus joined us to discuss Thursday.
I think what we're witnessing as a society is something that I would call the great unbundling of the car. So for 100 years, the model of all cities has been you own a car and you do everything with it. You do short trips, long trips, trips to the grocery store, trips to the mountains. You own a car, you do everything with it. But the ride-sharing companies and the rise of mobile phones and smartphones really demonstrated something, which is you can get a vehicle at the click of a button in a moment's notice. And what I think we're witnessing is the unbundling of the car. So you are now going to be able to get the right vehicle at the right time at the click of a button. And micromobility, these trips of roughly 3 miles or less, are a key component of that.
Well, what does that mean for Lime? I mean, I know they don't do just scooters, but what is the vision for how Lime fits in given the competition?
Well, what's very clear right now is that there's a huge interest in this micromobility segment, with e-scooters being the primary form factor. So just look at Lime's growth. The company already in its very short history has done 20 million trips. We're operating in 125 markets globally, and we're adding 5 markets a week. People are riding scooters incessantly until they're basically in the ground. And the reason is, the scooter's in the ground, just to be clear. And the reason is that basically it gets you where you want to go much faster in a short period of time, in a short range. And so that's what we're seeing in every city. And what they're often doing is they're combining it with some other form of public transit. They'll ride a Lime scooter to the train station, take the train into the city, and then ride a Lime scooter to their final destination, and then reverse that when they're heading home.
So do you see Lime expanding beyond scooters?
Yes, I think there is definitely big vision that Lime has, which is ultimately getting you the right electric vehicle for the right trip at the right time. Now, where we're starting is in this 3 miles or less with e-bikes and e-scooters, primarily as the vehicle types, because that's what that is a hole in the market today. But I think there's definitely appetite for other types of electric vehicles as we move forward.
What about the pushback from cities, from residents who don't like the clutter, they don't look good, they've been thrown in the ocean, they've been set on fire?
Yeah, well, you definitely see people doing things on Instagram that they shouldn't be doing with a scooter or an e-bike. You know, my general view is that we're going to figure this out. We're in this phase where these companies, Lime in particular, has been offering scooters for less than 9 months. And in that time, going to 20 million rides in the last 9 months, there's an incredible appetite for this vehicle type. But we're going to figure out with cities how to roll it out effectively, with consumers how to have habits of where you ride it on the street, and how you separate traffic from scooters to increase safety. So there's a huge amount that we're figuring out. But the thing that is exceptionally clear is that people love these devices. And I have never, in 25 years of being in the technology business, seen anything growing faster than this company.
So you don't think it's like the next Segway? I mean, you hear people who are very skeptical, like this 100%. Is not going to be the next Uber.
No, this reminds me of, look, I started my first company on the internet in 1993. It was a search engine. And I remember the stories when Amazon started, when people were using credit cards online for the first time. Oh, there was all these complaints about like, oh, you know, your credit cards are going to get stolen. You're going to have a tremendous amount of fraud. Yeah, there's some of that as a problem. But now everybody assumes you can use your credit card online. I think the same thing is true right now. There's a lot of concern about how these vehicles are going to be integrated into city flows. We're going to figure this out, and the reason is people adore this type of transit, and we're going to work to figure out how to keep traffic separated and how to make them successful.
Was a criticism of the Segway. They were, you know, didn't seem as great for women. There was nowhere to hang your purse, nowhere to hang groceries. Are just as many women riding these scooters as men?
You know, truthfully, I don't know what the demographic split is, but I will say that I think we're in a period of discovery. We're in a period of figuring out what's the right vehicle form factor. It is clear right now that scooters are the form factor that people love, these electric scooters. You can criticize them all you want, but people come off riding with a smile. And the data indicates that people will ride them again and again and again. But we're in a period of discovery. Should it be a 6-inch wheel, an 8-inch wheel, a 10-inch wheel? Should there be a handle for a purse? How do you make sure that should it have suspension or not? I think that in this period of discovery, we're working rapidly to figure out what the right vehicle type is.
There's been some concern that Lime's vision might be too big. I mean, that Focus is good. How do you respond to that?
So Google has this great adage of 70-20-10. 70% of Google's time and treasure goes to the core business, 20% goes to immediately adjacent businesses, and 10% goes to moonshots. And I actually see from now that I'm going onto the inside that that's really how Lime is allocating its time and treasure. So what I've seen is there's tremendous, breathtaking ambition of what we can do as a company in terms of providing the right electric vehicle at the push of a button. But they are really following this 70-20-10 kind of allocation. 70% to the core business of e-scooters and bikes, e-bikes, 20% to the next adjacency of other electric form factors, and 10% into the moonshots.
Now, GV also invested in Uber back in the day, but it got awkward. Google was doing self-driving. Uber started doing self-driving. Google started doing a carpool service via Waze. Uber wasn't too happy about this. There was the whole Waymo lawsuit. How can we be sure that it won't get awkward like that, given the relationship there?
You know, my general view is that Uber was a set of special circumstances. If you look at the 350 or so active investments that Google Ventures has, there's only been one conflict ever. It just happened to be in the highest profile investment that we had made. So I think the data would indicate that this is an extremely unlikely event.
Now, you know, we've been covering the Google walkout and Google now making changes to the sexual harassment policies. I know that GV is financially independent from Google, but it's still the mothership, essentially. What's been the message at GV to employees?
The message has been consistent, which is essentially, universal respect and basic human decency and a zero tolerance policy has been the norm at GV and continually enforced. And so I don't think there's any change in that whatsoever.
Do you think that these changes will be enough to quell discontent, quell some of the anger out there?
I don't know, but I know that you cannot stop trying to improve things, even if, I don't know if any one thing is ever enough, but in the fullness of time with consistent effort, that is the way real change is made.
That was Joe Kraus, Lime's first chief operating officer. Coming up, 23andMe may be able to tell you which medications will work best based on your genetic makeup. We'll hear from CEO Anne Wojcicki on their new FDA-approved drug response test next. This is Bloomberg. Symantec surged the most in 17 years Tuesday after Reuters reported that private equity firm Thoma Bravo inquired about an acquisition. While there's no certainty the discussions could lead to a deal, the discussions are giving investors hope as the cybersecurity software maker struggles to overcome waning consumer interest in antivirus programs. Thoma Bravo, meantime, has been on an acquisition spree, agreeing to buy Verkado Software Monday, as well as security software maker Imperva last month. Biotech company 23andMe, known for its DNA tests that tell users about their ethnic backgrounds and genetic health risks, is now adding pharmacogenetics, the study of gene-drug response, to that list. Last week, 23andMe won FDA approval for a test that can tell customers how they will respond to medications based on their genetic profile. While several other tests are on the market, 23andMe's is the first of its kind to get FDA approval for direct-to-consumer sale. So why are some calling it dubious science? I sat down with CEO and co-founder Anne Wojcicki at the Breakthrough Prize Awards to discuss. Take a listen.
It's a huge step forward. I think one of the things people don't realize that, every single one of us metabolizes medications in different ways. And so sometimes you can take a medication that works great for you, and I take it and it doesn't work great for me. Or in the worst case scenario, I have an adverse event and you're fine. So I think it's really it's an important science to bring forward. So I'd say this is step one. And there's going to be many steps around pharmacogenetics, this whole, genetics and drug interaction. So this is step one. We don't have any imminent plans of exactly when we'll have reports out to customers. We'll have to do more work with the FDA, but it is an incredible step forward. And I think my hope here is, when I think about my dreams in 5 years, every single drug coming onto the market should have a pharmacogenetic component to their label. And right now you see that in cancer and all cancer therapies, but you don't see it in all the other medications.
So what drugs are we talking about here? I mean,
we're talking about things like, there's well-known drug like Plavix is a common one. There's depressants, statins. Some people can take a statin and they get, muscle pain. So there's a lot of, this, like I said, psychiatric is one of the biggest areas. So there's a lot of medications that have already known associations. Plavix is always interesting for me because the state of Hawaii actually came out and changed some of the reimbursement laws because so much of the Hawaiian population does not genetically respond to Plavix, so they actually made some statements specifically about it. So that was one of the most interesting cases for me. But for them, there's a lot of medications. When we look at numbers and when we have the tests out before, we could see roughly 30% of our customers all had a significant response.
Yeah. What is your response to the controversies? I mean, there are some people out there who are extremely excited about this.
Yeah.
Like you, and others who are saying this is dubious science. Why is the FDA approving it?
What's interesting? I think that's just it reminds me. I mean, we're so used to the controversy now. It's just a matter of time and education. Yeah. And the science is so well established. I'm really, again, I look at people like Russ Altman, who used to be an advisor, who's a professor at Stanford. There's really great data out there about drug response. And, not in everything, 100% not in everything. But for the most part, it hasn't been widely disseminated. It's not often taught in medical school. Pharmacists are pretty up to speed on this, but there's a disconnect. And I think that's actually, frankly, the role of what 23andMe does, is that sometimes we help bridge gaps when there's there's information out there, but it's not necessarily part of the medical world right now. We're going to help make that a reality. And we're totally sympathetic. The medical world will be out there making sure that people know what to do with this information.
Right, because the FDA is saying, but you can't actually use it to make medical decisions. And so it's almost like they're trying to have it both ways.
I think at some point, that's just it's a matter of time for us. I think there'll be more analytical validity work for us to do, and we'll be able to make that happen at some point. But without a doubt, there's medications that are out there today where we can say, if you have this specific mutation, you definitely don't want to take it because you might have a severe adverse event.
So what do you imagine the test will look like? What do you imagine the test will cost? What are the knowns?
Well, we want to make genetic testing affordable, and we want to keep you engaged. I feel like, it's your genome. How are we going to keep you engaged on that? In some ways on drug testing, there's a lot of, this is an area you really do want to integrate in with your physician, and you really do want to integrate with your pharmacist. So we're thinking about additional ways that we can make sure that this is most useful for our customers.
And then what about all the other companies that are working on this stuff that aren't regulated?
That's a great question. So, it's one of the things, and I've been tweeting about this, is that there is this controversy where you have 23andMe, which is a direct-to-consumer company, and we own it. We do not require a physician, we do not require a genetic counselor, and we've gone through the FDA to prove that people can understand this information, that it's accurate, that it's safe, and that people can understand it. But there's a whole world out there that is not regulated, and that's the laboratory-developed test world. And those are companies that kind of slap on a physician on top. A lot of times people don't even know that there's a physician there, and they're kind of able to, avoid going through the FDA process. So the FDA actually put out a warning the day after our authorization, specifically saying, warning that there's a lot of other companies that have not gone through the FDA. And I think some of those claims, I can't speak on behalf of the FDA, but some of the claims definitely cause concern. They cause concern for our scientists, and I think that they cause concern. So I think 23andMe is a strong advocate. The FDA has the potential for innovating, and there needs to be one system that regulates all of these companies together.
23andMe CEO and co-founder Anne Wojcicki. And that does it for this edition of the Best of Bloomberg Technology. We will bring you all the latest in tech throughout the week. Tune in each day, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.